Awesome. What I want to know
helps.
next is the world's changing really fast. Chris, what's keeping you up at night these days? Related to this.
Sure. So I would say, one of the things is our customer problems and challenges. How do they stay relevant in the world going forward? I mean, here in San Francisco, you see the case around Uber versus the San Francisco taxi industry. Just this January, Yellow Cab Taxi, the largest provider of taxis in San Francisco, filed for bankruptcy protection. And so I'm spending a lot of time talking with customers on how to enable their business to adopt software, open source software, because that's a key factor enabling that business to modernize and stay relevant moving forward, to deliver services faster and quicker for their customers, to be able to synthesize that big data analysis they're getting from customer feedback and rich data sets to actually then turn around and deliver capabilities and features that the customers need based on that analysis and quickly to the marketplace. So those are the things that keep me up, is how do we enable these companies to deliver software, improve quality, and when the business needs it. And Red Hat is partnering with them to implement some enabling technologies to make that happen.
Actually, I want to stay on that for 1 second. Can you give us a sort of a success story that is sort of concise, but just along the lines of what you were talking about? I'd love to
Sure, a
hear
large
some more
internet
specific,
provider, a company down in the San Jose area, they came to us and they had a real challenge of delivering software quickly for the business. They had a couple of challenges. One, they had startups coming into their space that were delivering products quicker, in fact, 2 years ahead of this larger company. And it took them 6 to 10 weeks to update a single word on their website. How does a company move from delivering software in an unpredictable, very long cycle to one that's predictable in under 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Right. So now you have the marketing team that can actually advertise a new feature out in the marketplaces coming at a specific point. And then the finance department can actually predict revenue accurately around that feature introduction. So we're seeing a complete shift in the mentality in IT to not become the bottleneck, but actually be the enabler for the business to deliver when the business needs it. And when that happens, IT becomes a strategic differentiator rather than a cost center.
Sure, absolutely. Very good point. Michael, same question. So what's keeping you up at night?
It's probably security management. With the Internet of Things, and in particular with medical devices nowadays moving to having a lot of software and outside connections and everything, and all the software having open source components. I'm really surprised and afraid when I see how few companies have processes in place to get those updates in. I mean, open source, it's easy to see where you have vulnerabilities, it's easy to monitor your problems there, and you just send updates out. You might need somebody like Red Hat or like us to help you create the updates, because open source communities might just go in and release a new version, but you need a back patch and so on. But that's all doable, that's no big deal. But an awful lot of companies doesn't have any process to roll out their own new version. Just ask all the cell phone providers that that have Android but are not served directly by Google. How long does it take them to send out security updates for the phones? And it gets worse the more things we have on the internet.
Awesome. I'm going to come back to what keeps you up at night, because I think Joe has a question over here.
So my name is Joe Schuler. I'm with MasterCard. And I'd like to hear some of your experience around Red Hat, especially I can remember the first time a Red Hat salesman came to the door. We kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, whatever. We're going to use Linux, and that's fine." But I think the interesting lesson is that you guys have persevered and are currently a partner with us. How do you draw the parallel between the churn that's going on in the open source database world relative to the open source? Maybe it was more provider centric rather than different variants of Linux back in the day. So right now, a lot of the confidence that we're trying to gain around Postgres is churned up by, well, I want to use Couchbase, or I want to use other NoSQL variants or other things of that nature. Can you share your experience with Red Hat, maybe, or your experience with how that churn kind of stabilized and people became more comfortable with the adoption of your open source and how that might play out with the database space?
Great question.
Sorry, that's a long question. I apologize.
Oh, sure. So I would say, Red Hat gained its credibility early on with the financial sector. They were the early adopter of open source, as I would see it in the marketplace. And being able to run those types of workloads on Linux gained that much credibility. And then it was the internet and the tech companies. And so the other industries, the laggards, soon hopped on board with healthcare, insurance companies, et cetera. And I think, data was probably a laggard in terms of open source adoption because it was viewed as mission critical. It was okay to move the web app and printers over to open source. And so naturally, you're seeing the adoption curve later on open source with the data, just because that's the critical nature. And reducing risk, that would be the last part that you move on. It's no different than in the, as I work with these customers who want to accelerate application delivery and containerize their applications. They're containerizing the front end and the middle tier first, and then the data is the last to move to a container. So I think it's just a natural evolution of adopting technology with the low risk elements first and then saving the higher risk for later. And I think that's why you're seeing from the database perspective.
Ed, I see a lot of shaking of head over there.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, Joe, I may have been that sales guy that you laughed out back in the day. I think, having lived through a lot of that early, I was at Red Hat in 2000, late 2001, early 2002, so Linux was kind of just emerging. But I think I see differences too, because the variance of open source and the relative differences in the Linux world between SUSE and, at that time, gosh, what was out there? Debian and Red Hat, they were all Linux-based things, right? There was, a lot of commonality. So, yeah, there was a certain amount of confusion that people had to get over, kind of which flavor would I pick. And I agree with what Chris said. There were, patterns that emerged that made Linux much more resonant and relevant. I think in the database category, it's a little different because what you've got is, you've kind of got technologies like Postgres, which were born of the same technology thesis that, Oracle and IBM, DB2 and other technologies come from. And now you've got a new wave of alternate technologies that were born of specialized needs. And so now you're kind of dealing with, I think, and I do believe that some of those specialized needs, there's a drive to make those more general purpose and capability. And in some cases that is I think, been really effective. In other cases, I think it's been, a stretch. And I think, the struggle that I see our customers, and I think you guys struggle with too, is, what's the true fit for purpose for all these technologies, and how do I make them all work together? Because I don't think it's going to settle out the same way as it did with Linux. I got an axe to grind. I truly believe that Postgres plays a centerpiece role, kind of in that hybrid, that bridge thing that we talked about yesterday. I really believe that, and I think what we'll find is there are some really important specialized technologies, and they should be used exactly for that. And that the trick is going to be figuring out how to stitch them together. But I think it's different than what we saw with Linux. And certainly, in being in the category now and being in the company for over 8 years, that's more clear to me now than it ever was before.